Great, here we are. All right. Okay, good. All right. Yes. Okay, here we are. Welcome, everyone, to Autistic Voices Roundtable discussions. My name is Philip King Lowe. I am the owner, producer, and host for today's Autistic Moment, a podcast for autistic adults by an autistic adult and Autistic Voices Roundtable discussions. This program today. Okay. Sorry, I can't get to your question, but it is on it's on the sorry, YouTube channel. Go to the live broadcast. Okay. Um this program today is being sponsored by Minnesota Independence College and Community. Visit miccommunity.org to learn about MICC's work to provide higher education and job training for young autistic and other neurodivergent adults to take a step towards a more vibrant life. This program is also sponsored by Looking Forward Life Coaching. Visit lookingforwardlc.org. Looking Forward Coaching helps change stumbling blocks of life to stepping stones towards success. Thank you, MICC and Looking Forward Life Coaching, for making this program possible. This program is being shared live and recorded on the YouTube channel at Today's Autistic Moment. When you go to that channel, please be sure to click on live to listen to the live broadcast. Otherwise, you won't see it. So there are several menu options at the top there. So just click on live and you should be able to see the discussion. The program will be recorded so that if you're looking to watch it later, it will be available. So there you go. Well, today we are going to talk about what I love about being autistic. Here's why. We are going to set aside all of the negativity about being autistic and talk about how wonderful it is to be autistic. Um, I am joined by 5 panelists: Rachel, Jax, Jessica, Dr. Jessica, and Karen, who are going to tell you about what we love about being autistic. Before we begin, some panelists may not turn their cameras on when they talk for sensory or spoon reasons. So you may hear from them, but not see them. And, yeah, okay. Okay, so all right. All right. Oh, sorry, I gotta help one of my panelists get on here. Okay, now hold on, everyone. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Um, okay. Let me give it to our last panelist who's coming. Jax is coming in now. Okay. Sorry for the interruption, everyone, but here we go. All right. So let's start with Rachel. This first question is, what do you love about being autistic, Rachel? Tell us what you love about being autistic.
Um, I guess this may be sort of like an on answer, but like when I really think about what I love about being autistic, I think it's like um the purpose it's giving me, like in terms of like autistic like advocacy and self-advocacy. Like I enjoy like being able to have like my perspective and my voice to share and like just being able to help show like how unique like every person on the spectrum is just like by being myself. Like even joining this panel, like I think I joined it partially because I might be able to bring a slightly different perspective like to the idea of loving your autism and like loving being autistic to it. And I think like there's something interesting in knowing like you're able to look at the world like in a very different way. I think life would be like very boring if we all saw and experienced the world in the same way. So I think yeah, for me, that's my thing. And I think like strongly in terms of like what I love about being autistic. And I think like everyone in the autistic community in general. I love like how unique all our perspectives are. Um, so I think that that's my answer.
Okay, very good. All right, we're expecting one more panelist to join us, and they're having a little trouble getting on, but they shall join us soon. Uh, so let's go to Jessica.
Hi, and thank you very much for allowing me to participate today, Philip. The thing I like most about being autistic, similar to what Rachel said, is I just love the unique ways my brain works. And very creative, very interesting thoughts that get generated in my own head, and I have a variety of different special interests and talents that I can relate to in different ways that I think a lot of people don't have. Um, Sometimes I've been made fun of for those interests, but then in other contexts, people will give me a great deal of respect for the depth of knowledge I have in fields that are not my field of work or specific university study or practice. Such as music. I'm a musician, and I have been for most of my life. I play saxophone mostly by ear. I also read music, and I can mimic really well, so I can play songs that I've heard on the radio. I'm also very interested in politics, nature, ecology, and then for my day job, I work as a data analyst. Um, and I can generally see the relationship between all of those things and find the ways that they connect in the ways that I am interested in them. So there's a commonality between all of these things that I think a lot of people who study um, specific fields don't necessarily get out of those fields. So the way I'm able to deep dive on things, I attribute to my autism, and that's something that I really enjoy.
Good. Very well. Very good. Hey, Jax. Welcome. Welcome. Sorry about the matters of getting on. Okay, so the question is, what do you love about being autistic? And the next person we're going to hear from is Karen. Go ahead.
Thanks, Philip. I'm kind of piggybacking on what was already said, but I really do think that the unique perspective that I bring to my work and my hobbies, all of those things, there's kind of like a through line, right? Like seeing the details that other people don't see. And where I've really learned to embrace it is in my ability to create,
Mm,
creating art. And like I love to learn new ways of creating, but I also love doing things like taking photographs and really appreciating the details in the colors and the reflections of light, and how shadows impact different things. And I think that that's a really unique piece to the way that I receive information from the world. So it's a visual thing, but it's also very sensorial in other ways. But I think it also means that, I know many of us who are neurodivergent educators, autistic and other ways neurodivergent educators, we're in tune with the patterns and the innovative ways of figuring things out and connecting with others who are neurodivergent in ways that and in our case, non-autistic folks don't. So autistic students need autistic educators and autistic leaders in our schools. And that's something that I really believe in, and I'm relentless about. So I think that seeing things from a unique perspective, but also being able to utilize them for our interests and work.
Good, thanks. Before I continue to Dr. Jessica, Karen was my guest in a show in March about education for autistic women, and it is spectacular. So do go listen to that if you get a chance. Dr. Jessica, please answer the question. What do you love about being autistic?
Hi, I love being autistic in that I piggybacking off everyone else's. I see the world differently. I can usually have someone will pose a problem and it's just like, well, why don't you try this? And then just you get those looks of what? And then it's like, how did you know that would work? I don't know. It just came to my mind. Being creative, enjoying different hobbies, being able to, do the deep dives into information and just finding those patterns and the logic and enjoying it.
Yeah, that's good. Jax, what do you love about being autistic?
Part of, I think, the way that my autistic brain sees the world differently is how I sort of reverse engineer everything I break it down into its component parts. And then I sort of like play with those parts on an abstract, theoretical, or conceptual level in order to understand, it's kind of what Dr. Jessica Hicks was saying about the deep dives, right? So the increase of memory, attention, and focus when it comes to like hyper focusing on a special interest, or for me, I guess learning new things is kind of a special interest, so it gives me dopamine. So I dopamine, and so I just do as like deep of a dive on a new subject as possible. And the more that I break it down and the more that I play around with those little parts and try to put them together in new ways, the better I understand something. And so I have this ability now, which I think has kind of saved my life as a kid, because I had so much trauma and so many challenges, that I felt truly free only in my mind, where I could step out of the socio-cultural conditioning and all of the weird implicit social norms and things I didn't understand. And I could just play around with it in my head and experiment with it and like understand it from my own way, because no one else was in my head. So no one could tell me I was doing it right or wrong. And by doing that, I was able to learn and understand and apply the concepts on a much deeper level than my allistic or neurotypical peers. And so for me, this has been a life-saving gift, this way that my autistic brain functions.
Yeah, definitely. Great answers, everybody. Perfect answers. Very good. Yeah. Our second question for the panel. Can you name something that you love about being autistic that others might say is a problem? So for this one, let's start with Dr. Jessica. Please go ahead and talk.
All right. I'll giggle on this one because it gets me in trouble, but I know it also helps me, is being able to turn off my emotions when I need to. And yes, it comes across cold. That goes for those whole social norms things. I've learned to just not care what others think. I mean, it's not that I don't care. It's just that I'm me. But it comes in handy when there's those big stressor moments or emergency moments, or you have to deal with, loss in family, and I can turn it off and deal with things, and then, basically help those around me because I'm not falling apart. And then I can turn them back on later and fall apart on my own.
Good answer. Karen.
Oh, I think it's like anything, all of these questions you could answer in so many different ways, and the cogs are still kind of turning. For me, what comes to mind is related to, the monotropic brain and attention tunnels and the ability to really do those, like you mentioned, deep dives, right? And I think that the medical model language refers to things like, obsessions and, people, you hear terms like perseverate, and they're very negative. They're very deficit based. But I think, one of the keys to understanding who we are as autistics and autistic motivation is to understand that notion of, being able to have this intense focus. And yes, it is something that we have to manage, because I know time can literally evaporate for me when I'm deep diving. But like, this is where expertise comes from, and there's no autistic that will ever say they're an expert, because we never feel like we've got enough. But I think that this is where game changers come from. This is where innovation comes from. This is where the internet came from. This is where things like Google came from. This is where technologies and the best writing and the best creations in terms of art and so we have to really, I think, embrace that and defend that as not something to try to use as a carrot, as a reward, right? Like, don't use our interest as a reward, because that's actually doing the opposite of what it should be doing.
Absolutely.
We should be working with our strengths and our interests as our learning.
Absolutely. Yep. That's excellent. Thank you. Jax.
I wanted to echo already what was said, because there were things that I was thinking of, like, oh yeah, yeah, I was agreeing with. But for me, I think I have to laugh and say that the thing that's both the bane of my existence, like the thing that I struggle with the most, is also a positive social trait, and that's my nonconformity, or like defiance, and like insubordination thing, which we could talk about being related to PDA and pathological demand avoidance, right? And we could talk about it being like this problem, but I actually see it as a gift. And even though I do believe that my demand avoidance and my like defiant related issues do stem from like having autonomy stripped from me as a child, and people constantly invalidating me and gaslighting me and telling me I'm doing things wrong. So yeah, I can see how it could be a trauma response, but in some ways it also protects me, because when people try to manipulate me or dominate me or intimidate me in some capacity, or try to use like social rank or prowess or something that neurotypicals largely would be intimidated or scared by having that like taken from them or held over them because of the differences of the cultural values, for me, I'm like, do your worst. What you gonna do? Who are you? The president of the US? I don't care. Who are you? The prime minister of whatever? I don't care. Who are you? The head of the CIA? I don't care. Like I'm not gonna listen to you just because of your status. I'm gonna listen to you because you are treating me with respect. You are meeting me at my level. You're accommodating my autistic way of being, and we are going to work together collaboratively as peers. You are not going to pull rank on me. I don't care who you are. So for me, this actually has saved me a lot of trauma, being an AFAB person with people trying to subjugate me constantly. And I'm like, no. And so for me, I have this like immense defiance that comes, and it's just because it's like, I can't conform to something I don't agree with, I don't believe in. It's like my sense of integrity and justice and moral compass is so much stronger than my fear of societal rejection. And to me, that is one of the biggest gifts that my autistic nervous system and brain could ever give me.
Yeah. Brilliant answer. Brilliant answer. Rachel, go ahead.
Okay. I think my answer is sort of like related to what Jax was like talking about, but like slightly different. Like like I think it's like a lot of like I think like a lot of autistic people moving like a lot of people on the spectrum have like tend to sort of default to this sort of, this is something like ideal to someone sort of self-involved, so slightly oblivious to others, like thought process. And like obviously that sounds bad. It is something that's sort of like part of like something that like, people like on the spectrum need to work harder on is trying to like make sure like to that they are, remember that not everyone is like thinking with prioritizes the same things as them. Like, but at the same time, I think like the fact that like there's a tendency to sort of exist in sort of your own little world and be a bit like oblivious to other people, um like for me, ever since I was a child, that's something that has definitely like allowed me to sort of like march to the beat of my own drum. I wouldn't say like personally, some like people say like, oh, you don't care about what other people think, and that's like definitely not true for me, especially like rejection sensitive dysphoria is like a big thing, and I think like unlike Jax, like I'm definitely susceptible to pressure like on an individual level, but in terms of just like peer pressure and like trends and like things like that, that's something that like, I'm not really into like social media or like doing he's like trying to get that. I think a lot of like other, and I don't know this is bad per se, it's just how a lot of people work, and you get a validation from doing what like a lot of other people are doing, but that's not something like I feel. Um, and like, so well, on one hand, like it can be a problem because of my autism, I do have to work harder, like try and be considerate of others and like consider like their perspectives, deal with the frustration that like I think that whatever their perspective doesn't make sense, but at the same time, I think this is, well, it can seem like a problem. It's also something that's like allowed me like much more like the freedom to be truer, like to myself. That's my answer.
Okay, good. Great answers. Yes. Yeah, you've all given some great feedback to that question. I was telling Jax this when we were going over things the other day, but if you haven't heard her, go to my podcast and listen to Lisa Morgan is her name. Lisa Morgan owns autismcrisissupport.com. Her incredible story is that one night she came home and discovered that her husband had suicided. And so she's taken that and delved into helping autistics in moments of support. And she does it because of how she knows what it is to be unintentionally harmed by well-meaning professionals. So, I mean, she can talk about lots of that, but her story about how she's worked through that is incredible. And I say that's how you turn an autistic problem into amazing resilience, because oftentimes Lisa will give workshops actually for crisis counselors. Because as we know, if you're in a crisis, just because someone answers the phone does not mean that the autistic is going to be helped. Well, Lisa Morgan will often be meeting with a group of crisis counselors, and she will ask them the question, what are the strengths of autism? And there will be no replies in the room at all. So she has to be the one to educate. Yes, being rule-based is actually an autistic strength. Being honest to a fault is an autistic strength. So there we go. All right, now back to our panelists, and thank you for indulging me for a moment. Now, Our final question here, and this is going to be lots of great stuff, I know. How has accepting your being sorry, let me start again. How has accepting your autistic strengths changed your life? And this is exactly what I was talking about with Lisa Morgan, but let's talk about that. Jax, go ahead. You're up.
Well, yeah, sorry, I was just thinking for a moment. I think that, well, first, I didn't realize that I was autistic until I was 22. And that was only because someone else mentioned to me that struggling with understanding nonverbal communication was an autistic trait. And prior to that moment in my life, not one person had suggested I might be on the spectrum. Like there was a very brief like ADHD question mark, but at that point it was basically only understood to be like executive dysfunction and developmental trauma, ADHD, not like neurodivergence as well in its own way. So I was like, well, I don't really think that it's ADHD, you know, like and it was also a lot of the hyperactivity thing. So I went from 22 years of my life thinking I was just broken, that there was just something wrong with me, that I was a monster, a demon, just evil, and like deserved nothing but punishment, because that was the message I was receiving from society. And I didn't understand why, because I had no formal diagnoses. You know, as far as I could tell, I was white or white passing, despite being Latin and not knowing how that was impacting things at the time too, and then also not knowing I was non-binary. So there was like so much going on. All I could hear was like, you're wrong, you're broken, you're defective, everything you're doing is just wrong. And so once I heard about autism, and at the time it was introduced to me as Asperger's syndrome, so I started to look into the end quote female presentation, because depending on how we're socialized and, you know, sexual dimorphism and things like that, like it does develop or present differently. And so initially, kind of like Hannah Gadsby, I was like, what? I'm not autistic. I'm not like that, right? But then I started looking at the female traits and I was just like, whoa, this is really like, I feel really seen in a way that I've never really, and I've been looking for this. It felt like my whole life I was looking for a descriptor of who I was, and human wasn't cutting it. Right? Yeah. And so after I like discovered, oh, wait a minute, the traits that I have are not, they don't mean that there's something wrong with me. They just mean that I'm autistic, and being autistic is just another type of being human. And once I started to meet other autistic people, especially AFAB or femme individuals, it was like, whoa, like I've found my people. Like this makes so much sense. And then I went from feeling completely hopeless and in despair constantly, and feeling horrible about myself, to start to love myself. And I started to be able to accept and embrace and celebrate the things that made me uniquely me and autistic. And I started to understand, oh, it's systemic abuse. My mental illness, right? My self-worth issues, my trauma, it was because of society not accepting and loving and understanding and meeting me where I was at. And so that has changed everything. And that's why I'm here to continue to spread the good word that we're not broken. We're just different.
Yep. You and my friend Eric Garcia, We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation. That's a book Eric Garcia wrote. Go read it. You will not be sorry. All right, Karen.
Oh, so much to say. I mean, I think I've been able to learn how to work with my strengths, to be kinder to myself, to understand myself a lot better. And we talk about these retro epiphanies, right? This kind of engineered term where we have these moments that we think back on where we were like, oh, so that's why that was happening, right? So being able to understand when we utilize that pattern recognition, we can look back and reflect on why we are the way we are, and embrace it, but also be kinder so that we're not trying to fit this mold, this neuronormative way of being. And I think, it's hard to exist in a state of self-understanding while also advocating. But I think many of us jump to that right away because the wrong that has occurred to us and so many others is like we need to right away get on it, because again, we're wired, and I don't even like the term wired, but we have this predisposition to be, for lack of a better term, the whistleblower, the ones who will put ourselves out there, because we do more harm by not. Right. And I certainly don't want people to think that they have to put themselves out there at risk to themselves, but many of us do, specifically because the change is so essential, not just for us, but for anybody who is walking this path. And, we can't speak for everybody, but I think finding my strengths and understanding myself has allowed me to, like I mentioned earlier, really get to understand the diversity within the autistic community, and to amplify as much as I can those who are most marginalized. But that means also being a champion for autistic emancipation, autistic human rights, communication rights, access to communication, learning, and being the best champion that I can be, so that, in my time on earth, I can effect as much change as possible. I think that's where I'm at.
Yep. I often speak of autistic communication as like playing the old battleship game. It's hit or miss. All right. Rachel, go ahead.
Okay. So I think like for me, like I personally often tend to like view it more as I guess really focus like less, I guess, on autistic strengths specifically, but more about not seeing my autistic traits as weaknesses. Like I know that talking about strengths, like, or also sometimes it's like called like the superpowers, like framing or things like that. That's not something that always speaks to everyone, like on their spectrum and like their own relationship with autism. And I think sometimes my feelings can be a bit mixed as well. But like even when like we can't always feel like even when I can't always feel positive about my artistic traits, I can still like approach them as like this is how I am, and like I want to be accepted this way rather than like struggling to change myself. And like being able to accept stuff like visiting being helpful for me and making it clear to others that this is just sometimes something I need to do. Like being able to do things like that just takes like some of the stress out of my life, and it can help, improve self-esteem. And I think like I liken it a bit to like sort of talking about like body positivity versus body neutrality. Like I know when like after a while with the body positivity movement, there were a lot of people that were like, well, like, I don't necessarily like the pressure to feel a certain way about my body, even if it's like in a good way. And so like body neutrality was sort of created as a response to that. And it's sort of like the idea that even if you have a hard time loving something about yourself, like even with learning to feel neutral like towards it can have many benefits. And I think that's mostly how I tend to like um look at it myself. Like I do think like there's things I value about my autism, and like it's like it makes who I am. Um I think for me, I just like, especially with the way it interacts with my ADHD, I think I still encounter like a lot of struggles that it's hard sometimes to concretely say like this is like a strength, when I think I still see a lot of like the negatives. But I think just being able to say like it's not necessarily like a weakness either. I think is still like very important and like really helps just in terms of like not, being in that always being in that sort of mode of feeling like broken, and because in the end, like that's just not going to be helpful to you and it's not going to serve you. So I think that's my own view on it.
Good. Well said. Jessica, go ahead.
Well, I feel like I've kind of always defined myself by what I see in others around me. So when I was a very young child, I was the oldest of three kids, and my parents are likely both neurodivergent. So we had, an odd upbringing, or really just the fact that we lived in very small towns. And, my dad worked for the federal government, so we never had a lot of money, but that was not the desire. That was not anybody's overwhelming goal. And I really think that that fits with an autistic or neurodivergent perspective. So I felt really cared for and seen and validated in my family. Um, and even when I got into school in the small schools I was in before high school, I had really good learning experiences. And didn't have any issues. Now, when I got into high school, we had moved to a different place, and then um, conformity was way more expected, and I was already advanced in some subjects above my grade level, but we had moved into a new place. So I was taking classes over again. I was very bored. I lost a lot of my love for school because school no longer represented learning to me. I did most of my learning outside of school from that point on. And then the workplace after school was also, very invalidating. And it gave me a lot of struggles. So,
Mm.
when Jack said they were not identified as autistic until their 20s, I was not until my 40s. Um, and it was a very, very hard way to live for quite a while.
Oh, yes.
I apologize for my emotion. This is what
No,
happens to me,
don't do
so
that.
I'm good with it now. So I think the thing that really helped me was the timing of my identification in 2019 was right before the pandemic, about 6 months before the onset of the pandemic. And
Yep.
while I won't say that that was a good experience by any stretch of the imagination, I feel like we're still all dealing with the ramifications of what we all went through systemically. Um, it was extremely helpful for me to have that break from going into the office. Because the reason I got diagnosed was struggling with an office redesign and remodel that had made me come very close to quitting my job that I had had for 15 years. And that I'm still very good at. I still have this job. But
Yeah.
it was because I got to work from home and everybody got to work from home that I could just chill out a little bit and not have to worry about that performance aspect. And so I feel like I was given this gift of time to sort through a bunch of things. And I leaned back into writing. I was able to connect with people, being more confident in myself through experiencing the deficits and the burnout and the, overwhelming things that were happening to me immediately before my identification, and the contrast of what has unfolded after that have just been night and day.
Yes.
And I think putting into context not only my strengths, but my deficits, my weaknesses, my challenges, and being able to confidently reach out to people who can fill those needs for me in a partnership or a collaboration has been just a complete game changer in my life, and not something I was ever able to do before that.
Yeah. I share that one. All right. Dr. Jessica, go ahead.
So yeah, I love all the answers here and definitely feel the same. So I'll just break up the back end. And it's, for me, the ability to learn to unmask, because again, I was not diagnosed, well, fully diagnosed until my 30s. It kind of was starting to get diagnosed when I was getting my children diagnosed. And they looked at me and said, yeah, you know, you are too. I'm like, yeah, we're not here for me. like, I need to help my kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we're here for the kids. And it's just like the realization, and now looking back and the dots connecting and going, oh, I wasn't just weird or the outcast. I wasn't broken. It was just how I was. And so now it's the letting myself unmask and letting myself be me, and showing that to others around and being that advocate, and working hard. And that's why I went after my PhD, is so I could have some standing and do some research and help others. It's that fulfilling of that justice and equity and equality, and
Absolutely.
like letting people know, hey, it's okay to tell people, hey, I can't deal with a phone call right now, text me. Hey, I really need this day off. Like, I can't people, or, not feeling bad if you break plans, even though you had plans for a month and it just comes up to it and you just, you can't, you're going to have a little breakdown if you try and go.
Yep.
And just not letting the expectations of others fall on you, and just being like, hey, this is for me, and me comes first. And that's what needs to happen. And I think it's giving that power to others, and like showing that to others. Like, I see it in I'm luckily the president of our employee resource group for neurodivergence and disabilities where I work, and just being that voice for others, and then now seeing others start to speak up more is amazing, and getting leadership to start to listen, and getting to make that change. Yeah, being that squeaky person that just like, well, hey, yeah, I'm gonna be defiant, like Jack said. Like, I don't care if you're the CEO, you're gonna listen because I'm gonna keep talking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's saying it enough times to get the change to happen.
Yeah.
And it's realizing that we have been told we're the minority, but in the research I'm doing, we're not the minority. We're just been shoved down in a box, and us round curvy selves trying to fit in these square holes, and told, hey, this is what you got to do. And it's like, no, it's time for us to speak up and be like, hey, we're here, we have been here, and we're going to do something about it now.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
Unmask and be proud.
Agreed. Yeah. Just to kind of, before I give my closing remarks, today's autistic moment came into being because I had this passion for autistic adults, and I had it in large part because of the Autism Society of Minnesota when I did the classes to be certified as direct support for autistic people. And when I had that passion, I got to do something with it, but I don't know what. Well, I've said this story a few times. I was visiting with a counselor at the Minnesota Department of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. And we were talking about how am I going to take this, monetize it, and make a difference. And so someone there said the word podcast, and that word stuck with me. And I started to ask some people, I said, there's just no way I could pull this off. They said, are you sure? Because you've got a good radio voice. I'm like, I do. That's news to me. That sort of thing. So, and today's autistic moment became what it is because of that conversation and others that followed. So, one of the things we are definitely able to do is to take what people perceive as our challenges and turn them into opportunities. And, each autistic individual is in their own place since they discovered that they are autistic. Some have gotten a medical diagnosis in adulthood. Some got a school diagnosis when they were young before the medical diagnosis. Others discovered they're autistic by self-discovery. A lot of autistics, including myself, once we get the news of their identity, we may go through periods of grief, anger, depression, anxiety, and being lowered on the tiers of neuronormativity. Okay. Again, these experiences are equally valid. Lisa Morgan and I just talked about that on self-care, grief management and support, where we talked about, you have this news and you're like, what could have been if only I had known sooner? I think we go through enough of that. However, my panelists and I also arrived at a place where we no longer accepted being limited by a medical pathology. Once we discovered and learned to love being autistic, there was no going back. We found ways to appreciate who we are, found other autistics, and discovered that being autistic is a pathway to resilience and self-dedication to live happy lives. While a broken healthcare system, medical communities, and multi-million-dollar organizations have labeled us as, quote, having a deficit, end of quote, each of us are proud of being autistic because it is who we are. This panel has been celebrating that identity. Lastly, coming up this Sunday on today's Autistic Moments podcast, I will be joined by guests Nicole LeBlanc and Becca Lori Hector for the episode Autistics Living with Unsupportive People. We will talk about the lack of affordable and adequate housing for autistics who wind up living with people who do not support their autistic needs, how to create consistent boundaries, create safe spaces, with some resources to find supports. Go to todaysautisticmoment.com or your preferred podcast app to hear this fantastic show that's coming up this upcoming Sunday, the 22nd of September. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists who have been absolutely superb in what we have set out to do today. I came up with a phrase a few times ago that, we know that neurotypicals, you have your way of thinking about being normal, and somehow we are, quote, abnormal. But for us, being autistic is our normal. And as I said on a few, your normal and our normal, they can coexist. And what we're asking you to do is give us an opportunity to coexist with you. So thank you again to our panelists and all of you who are on YouTube, either today or those of us who may join us after the show is completed. Thank you for being here, and I hope that this particular episode here has given you some strength to continue on with wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and so on and so forth. And as I say at the end of all my shows, may you have an autistically amazing day. Let's see. Sorry, everybody. Yes. Okay. So, all right. Hold on, everybody. Right now, technology is not my friend.